Oh, dude, I forgot. A separate story. This is a little bit of a downer. I want to talk to you about a separate story that I think is actually interesting news. Couple things. The first one is, you know how I'm always shitting on Gen Z, talking shit about Gen Z. Oh, Gen Z ADD, Gen Z brain rot, whatever. Well, I got something positive to say about Gen Z. It turns out Gen Z is the swollest generation. And that's because for the first time in history, Gen Z is buying gym memberships and actually using them. And gyms hate it. Gyms are super pissed off that Gen Z is literally buying memberships and not just quitting. They're showing up. This article goes into a lot of reasons, but fitness is a high priority for Gen Z, higher than usual. And then they're finding the gym to be like a third place. You know how I used to have like malls and churches and whatever? People are hanging out at the gym. They're meeting their friends there. They're finding some place to like do something together with friends. And you know, that's all good for the user. But gyms are now getting overcrowded because usually nobody actually goes. When it was like a non-social isolated thing, people would go once or twice and then quit. And now people are actually going, and it's like, it's changing the paradigm, which is really funny. Over the past 3 years, I've noticed a significant increase, especially in young people going to the gym. The weight and the treadmills are always very busy. The low cost, high value gym model doesn't work when two people start regularly attending. Because once it starts getting crowded, everyone starts ditching it, you know, so it doesn't work. And then member satisfaction goes down, churn rate goes up. So it's very, very interesting. And the corollary to that, the bad news, there's good news, bad news, then good news again. Okay. I'm gonna give you a sandwich. So that's the good news. The good news is Gen Z is swole. They're taking their health more seriously, which is cool. They're going to the gym more often, which is cool. And gyms, which are kind of like generally scammy businesses, are paying the price, which is also cool. Good for them. The sad part is they're gonna start raising prices. So Planet Fitness, which has had a $10 membership for 26 years, is raising prices by 50%. I'm sure plenty of you use Planet Fitness. I've used Planet Fitness. I don't use it anymore. Very briefly, I used Equinox when Twitch subsidized it. And now I have this local no-name gym. But they're raising prices. So that's the downside. Part of that's inflation. Part of that is that they're getting overcrowded. So they have to like raise prices to reduce that. Their CEO was also fired. Just taking it back to that. Like I said, I just want to tell you this this through line you're going to start seeing. CEOs getting fired and then hard choices. Price raisings, layoffs, union busting. This is all happening. We're in a CEO replacement era right now where shareholders are knuckling down and demanding CEOs that are going to do like the really unpopular shit. So that's happening. But anyway, the good news to close it out, the good news to sandwich this is that the FTC via Lena Khan is attempting to ban the ability of gyms to make it difficult to cancel. They want mandatory one-click cancel online for gyms because of how big the problem has gotten for regular Americans, which is awesome. I really hope this passes. We'll watch a video.
Federal Trade Commission is expected to finalize a click to cancel proposal as early as today. Now that would require companies to make it just easy to cancel a subscription or service as it was to sign up.
That's awesome. That's just good pro-consumer news. Dude, I mean, she's been killing it. And I've heard, obviously, I shouldn't talk too much, but I know people that work there. Okay, that's what I'll say. And they are obviously crunching to get more stuff passed before the election, because if Trump wins, it's all over for them. So they're trying to do the best they can to get it all passed. So I don't know. I'm very, 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 very... I mean, and also, by the way, if Kamala wins, it might also be over for them. I want to be clear here that there is a lot of the big donors for Kamala are also pressuring her to do the same thing. She has more Wall Street and big Hollywood donors than Biden did. Either way, I'm worried for Lena Khan, but I think it's going to be much more difficult for Kamala to fire her than it will be for Trump. Trump will be able to do it, and no one else probably going to be mad. We will see. Either way, I think it's dope. I think it's awesome legislation. I hope it comes out. One-click cancel on gyms would be great. When I was in SF as like a 22-year-old working at Twitch, I got locked into a membership at a 24 near my place, and I could not cancel it. They made me come in person, which is so annoying, because the reason I was canceling is because I didn't go in person, and it really, 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 really pissed me off. So I'm glad that this is changing. Is she gonna make a statement about keeping Lena Khan? I don't know if she's spoken about it. Has Kamala spoken about Lena Khan? She has not said, but I just know that Reid Hoffman, the LinkedIn billionaire, and a few others have been pushing her to. However, I think Matt Stoller, the Monopoly guy, he's not the Monopoly man, he's a guy that writes about Monopoly. He wrote the book Goliath, which I thought was really good. Seems to think it'll be difficult for her to do it, if she even wanted to, and she might not. Where do you get your initial get Goliath? Goliath's a good book. It might be a little out of date now, but Goliath was one of the first books that it was the first book that I read that truly eye-opened me to how many small monopolies we have in America. Like, for example, if you are a parent and you have a daughter who's in cheerleading, or a son, whatever, who's in cheerleading, it turns out all of cheerleading in America is controlled by a cartel of like 1 or 2 companies, and they drastically overcharge for all the equipment and the training in the camps. There's just like one company, and there's no competition. You can't get it from anywhere else, and everything gets massive overcharged. That's like one stupid example, but like everything. There's so many things that we've consolidated down to one company that can charge whatever the fuck they want because they don't have competition. A lot of school stuff, things around school books and College Board and all that. Good example. John Deere is the great example in the book about how farmers just cannot get farm equipment without going through John Deere, and John Deere massively overcharges them, won't let them repair their own vehicles. It's a good book to understand the power of monopoly and how important antitrust is. And then it also goes into how, I talk about this all the time. I basically aped this, dude. I talk about how, in the post-World War II era, post-Great Depression era, actually, we did antitrust enforcement successfully. And it worked, and it caused a huge upswing in competition in America. And we had the best golden age of like capitalism in America, where we had a stronger middle class. We had tons of flourishing, growing businesses. We had rising real wages. He talks about all that in the book. So it's pretty good. I recommend it, though probably it's 2018 maybe, that book. So it's a little out of date. What's the book's name again? Goliath. We need to keep calling inflation greedflation. I hate to push back on this, but I will. I think it's funny to imply that sometimes companies are greedy and sometimes they aren't. Like some companies are the greedy ones, and the ones that aren't raising prices are the nice ones. They're all greedy. Do you know what I'm saying? They're all greedy and they all want to raise prices. And the only reason they can continue to raise prices is because they don't have competition. It's the very reason that they're having to slash prices now at places like McDonald's and fast food places. It's because people are going elsewhere. They would raise prices forever if they could. They're choosing not to because they're losing customers. And I think when you call it greedflation, people use that to imply that inflation isn't real. And inflation is very real, and it's happening. And it's happening because there's too much money being printed. That almost lets gigantic government deficits off the hook. It's kind of like that MMT type. It doesn't matter what we spend. It's only greedy companies raising prices. Some of it is not direct supply chain inflation, but that's my pushback on that. But I think the best solution to stop the greed of them is to not shake my finger at them and call them greedflation. It's to make sure they have competition. And if they don't, break them up. Yeah, this is a good way to put it. It's like implying if we just had a different, less greedy CEO, then they wouldn't raise their prices. Like the strategy of shaming a company into doing something, you end up with either only the nice companies doing it and then getting punished while the unethical, amoral companies don't give a shit. And then eventually the CEOs that don't raise the prices, then they get fired and get replaced anyway. You have to systematically solve it. And then the way to systematically solve it is to introduce competition, because then they will lower the prices because then they're afraid. Tying minimum wage to inflation? I think that's probably I have to read more into it. Listen, the problem with all government policies in the economy is you really got to think about the first and second and third order effects. The classic example that I'll just begin with is the one, I don't even know if this is 100% factual, but it's the tale. It's used for the books, right? Is the idea that in India, the ruling British nobles put out a bounty on cobra heads because they wanted to get rid of all the snakes. And instead of getting rid of cobras, even though it sounded like a good idea, people started breeding cobras. Then there was a bunch more snakes. They were breeding cobras to sell the heads, right? That's the idea. Whether or not that happened, it's not really important. I think the point of the thing is like incentives are what matters. What you have to understand is if you make something that sounds good in theory, but it creates perverse incentives, you end up with a very bad policy. Things like price controls usually work that way, where price controls sound good, but then you end up with shortages, right? So you have to think it through and be careful with it. And many politicians will vote for something that sounds good and gets their base excited and then ends up being really bad. I mean, a great example is like the rules we talked about for Australia housing, negative gearing. If you have a house that loses value, you can tax deduct. Or if you run a house at a loss, like you rent a house out and don't make the profit, you can deduct it from your taxes. It sounds good, right? Oh, let's not make somebody pay taxes on a house that loses money. But then what happens is you end up with a insanely housing bubble economy where everyone's buying infinite amount of houses to deduct all their taxes and run rentals at a loss. you create this miserable economy for Australia where nobody can buy a house if they're a young person. I heard that inflation is really caused by the velocity in which money is exchanged rather than the total amount of money in circulation. Do you think this is accurate? No, but there's truth in it. So the total amount of money being added to the money supply is really the core base of inflation. However, there's a lot of tricks the government can do to introduce money into the supply where it only goes to wealthy asset holders who only use it to buy assets. So they can only have the inflation problem show up in real estate, in stocks, in assets. And you don't see it on your grocery shelf. That is like where the money is. There's no velocity in the money. It's all in them printing money to buy bonds. And it gets into the big banks and it gets into the asset holders and it goes there, which is a way of hiding it. That's what we did for 20 years. That's still inflation though. That's still people's lives. Like when you're a young person, you can't buy a house. It's still inflation. Like the houses are cost too much. It's still a problem, but you don't feel it in your wages, in your grocery prices, and your gas prices. So it doesn't feel like inflation. So there's something to that, to where the velocity of money is, but it still happens. And so I think it should still count. Yep. Poor people ruin the reputation of capitalism nowadays. Just work harder. I don't know if that's exactly what I was saying, but I do think that is 100% true. And I'm glad you said it. I'm glad somebody was brave enough to say it. It just feels like the poor are lazy. Is that crazy to say? It's like, don't cancel me, but I feel like everyone who isn't rich didn't work hard. And like, I'm glad we can just breathe easy and say it.